the challenges that emerge from, rapid growth in any industry, it's, really about the fragmentation that occurs. The amount of capital that's gone into digital health has created an amount of fragmentation that's just really difficult to keep up with. And there are plenty of aggregators out there, but, I think very few curators.
Healthcare in America isn't just complex, it's chaos, with the information and power stacked against employers and patients. On Margin of Care, we set out to rebalance that scale. Today, we're talking to Chad Cruse, the VP of Ecosystem at Benefitfocus, and a guy with an enormous amount of first-hand experience in helping employers put healthcare solutions into practice. They build custom benefits management tools for employers, and in an era of fractured care options and wild point solution proliferation, Benefitfocus is trying to make healthcare simpler and more effective for businesses. We'll cover everything from what types of solutions have the best track record of success to the employer engagement tactics that ensure those solutions don't just work in theory. Today, we're tackling one of the most important and often overlooked questions in HR and benefits leadership. How do we build a truly connected year-round ecosystem that helps members get the most out of their benefits, not just during open enrollment, not just during OE, but every single day of the year? Super excited to bring in an expert voice. Chad, thanks so much for joining us today. Why don't we start out? Just tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your role at Benefitfocus. How do you think about the benefits ecosystem?
Kirk, thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you. And I thought that was a brilliant opening. And maybe I'll answer your question in this way, because I think even as you sort of laid out the importance of a connected ecosystem, what came to mind for me was just how different the Ben admin space has sort of become, from when I got into the business, which was, longer ago than I care to admit. But back in the day, it was sort of about data transactions. Enrollments are going to happen here once a year, as you mentioned, maybe a life event here or there. And then I need you to get that data to the carrier so they can issue policies and pay claims. There's been sort of this shifting expectation, particularly over the last couple of years, where employers have, I think, realized that, yeah, that's important. You have to transact data and it's important that it's accurate and all those things. But there's an emerging expectation that folks in this space really need to play the role of an engagement partner. And it's not to say that there aren't other solutions in the universe that are, providing communications and things of that nature. But, the benefit administration company is uniquely qualified to play that engagement function because, we are the one place that you do have to go every year. And so to the extent that you can build the right connectivity and the right point of view with the ecosystem, you can sort of broaden the aperture and invite members in, many times throughout the year. And so, that's been a deep, sort of investment thesis for us at Benefitfocus. And I know others in the space as well, because we kind of feel like that is the calling upon a benefit administrator at this point, which is, look, it's about how do you get members to both understand, the benefits that they have and then use them effectively throughout the year.
VP of Ecosystem. That's a pretty cool title. I honestly don't think I've ever come across somebody else with a title like that. Like what does day-to-day look like as the VP of Ecosystem? Talk a little bit about what that means at Benefitfocus.
Yeah, I mean, so I think I made it up. So that might be it.
Kudos to you. I love it.
Maybe it isn't HR approved. I'm not sure. But so maybe I could talk about a day in the life a little bit in the context of, what's happening in the industry a little bit, just so you understand my purview is it's our carrier business. So think life, disability, voluntary carriers, lifestyle benefits, things of that nature. Digital health, of course, is part of that. If financial well-being is part of that. And, we're thinking about some really exciting things on that space. But what's really interesting is the polarities of all of these different parts of the business, which, and it's on one side, you've got, part of the world around benefits is really still in the Stone Age, and you'll talk to partners or vendors, and it's difficult for them to imagine an SSO to get members to their member portals. But then you talk to another vendor or partner, and they're using AI to predict the likelihood that you might need an MSK care solution. And it's almost like the industry has both feet on one on the gas pedal and one on the brake pedal as hard as they can possibly go. And I'm in between, just trying to trying to figure out how to make all of these different parts talk to one another effectively.
I got to tell you, when you were talking about sort of like old school Ben admin, you kind of gave me shivers. I can remember way back when I was like a junior employee on the consulting side, sitting at my desk and doing open enrollment testing of sites to make sure people were getting the right benefits offered to them before they actually went live on OE, and like many a late night, and to kind of think about like how the benefits enrollment experience has moved from like that very tactical, operational, here's the plan I want to enroll in for the next year with my family, to like, I think really becoming a destination like 365 days a year where somebody could come in and get access to all things related to their program. There has been a lot that's changed in the last few years. So from your vantage point, like what has been a lot of that change in the last few years? What does new look like right now on the Ben admin side?
Yeah, and I think you kind of almost have to go to sort of demographic changes in the workforce, and this sort of digital nativism that exists today that is quickly becoming the preponderance of your workforce. People are willing to share information about themselves in exchange for value. Yeah. And that hasn't always been true. We've, folks like you and I probably are still a little gun shy on sharing our information. But I think we're quickly becoming, the minority. And the reason that's important is because as companies like Benefitfocus, where we're so heavily invested in healthcare data and using that effectively to serve members, our ability to see the members' healthcare journey in real time and see how they're using their health plan allows us to become extremely relevant to them, and drive engagement in more than a PDF. Like, we want to tell you, hey, maybe you should consider using this program or that program, or you haven't gone to a physician in a while. Maybe you should check in with your primary care physician, or better yet, if you don't have one, hop into Garner and find the right one, right? A little plug for you. But the willingness to share information about yourself really unlocks what folks like Benefitfocus and our competitors can do on behalf of employers and brokers and ultimately employees.
I'm curious to get your perspective. Like, you imagine get a chance to see a lot of what's next and have a lot of conversations with organizations like Garner. I know we're going to talk about the Care Partner panel here in just a couple of minutes too. So you get a chance to sort of be on the forefront. Where do you see the biggest gaps right now? And where do you see the fastest growth in the ecosystem as you're sort of thinking about like next generation of what Benefitfocus is going to be doing?
Kind of tough to answer biggest gaps and fastest growth in the same breath. I'm going to do my best. But I think if I could just maybe harken back to something I mentioned earlier, which is the polarity of the ecosystem. That to me is easily the biggest, challenge. You have to wear so many different hats when interacting with each one of those different, partners or vendors, and they're on such a different playing field from a technology perspective. That presents a challenge. But when I see the challenges that emerge from rapid growth in any industry, it's really about the fragmentation that occurs, right? So the amount of capital that's gone into digital health since post-COVID 2021-ish has just been alarming, and that's maybe alarming in a good way for a lot of folks. But what it's done is that it's created an amount of fragmentation that's just really difficult to keep up with if you're an employer or or a broker. And there are plenty of aggregators out there, but I think very few curators. And we sort of saw that amount of fragmentation as an opportunity for us to lean in and sort of help curate the digital health space on behalf of, our brokers and their clients.
Yes, I mean let's go there, right? So earlier this year, you guys at Benefitfocus, you launched this care partner panel, new approach to digital health solutions that helps employers vet digital health tools. So when you're thinking about your initial panel of those partners, what is the it factor that was sort of part of the equation when defining the value of who those partners were going to be in sort of that initial launch?
Even backing up from there, like what categories are you going to play in?
Yeah.
Early on, the initial proposal to me was that we would play in two, and that would have been smart, right? Like we should have maybe started a little smaller. But when you look at the data, like you just can't ignore the fact that the cost drivers associated with some of these other things, whether it's MSK or behavioral health, these matter a ton. And so to just pick one or two conditions just felt really incomplete. And so we allowed the data to sort of inform, the categories we would invest in, where were our employers, dealing with sort of the most dramatic impact to their healthcare spend. And, it took us 2 years, right? Like we were in the lab for 2 years doing this before we actually launched it to market. The number one sort of it factor, if you're going to call it that, is efficacy. And that may seem boring, but we really wanted to make sure that there was substantial literature around the clinical claims that these providers were making. That was a number one. And then, from there, obviously you develop a cross section, a lot of different people who see the solution and think about how it might fit into both our operational process and our customer success process, and our point of view on what it means to serve clients in the 1,000+ space. The ability to show up as a partner, and by that, I mean more than just someone that has a piece of paper, a contract, with us, but the ability to show up and say, "Hey, we're starting here at A, we got to get to Z, and we're going to be here for it." And that's so tough to measure on paper. It's about spending time with each potential partner and understanding their commitment to partnership in general, at the leadership level, but then also partnership with us, and seeing the possibility of what our set of assets might mean to their business. Those were the big things, right? Is can we envision what 5 years later looks like with this partner, and are we moving the needle together for our shared brokers, employers, and members? If you could say it's a if factor, it's really those things for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing I love about it too is, you're hitting a large swath of the population. If you start with, two different solutions, maybe you start with something like, maybe cardiovascular, et cetera. Like you're hitting pockets of people, but you're not hitting the broad, population as much as possible, and kind of supporting the full employee population. I think what you guys have done is really curated a kind of across the continuum of like members of a population that are in a quote unquote like well category or kind of low risk category, all the way through, high risk, and obviously part of those really significant claim drivers too, but like everything in between as well. So what has the feedback been from the market so far as you're out kind of talking about this care partner panel with your employer clients and your prospects?
Yeah, I mean, it's been overwhelmingly positive. We sort of internally, we've called this year zero for the program. And I did that because I, didn't want a quota for it, if I'm being honest. But, but
That's good
I'm
sales
kidding.
acumen right there.
Yeah. But no, we really saw this as like, let's get our commercial, legs under us together, and make sure we're going about it the right way, and not being disruptive in any capacity to any of the constituents in our ecosystem. But yeah, no, it's been, some of our, largest, customers and prospects have really leaned into this concept with us. And overwhelmingly positive, I would say, has been the early innings, and expect that it'll continue to only grow because our customers are great about talking to one another, and again, we're going to only invest further in the solution itself, but then also expanding the aperture to include additional conditions and solutions.
One of the challenges that we just hear anecdotally that employers and brokers and consultants still seem to be challenged with is we're putting all these really good solutions in place. I think we have a stat somewhere that the average large employer has something like 16 vendors in their ecosystem right now. And ultimately, it's very well intentioned. Like, it's the right instinct to do this right now. But ultimately, that's contracting with, 14, 15 different vendors. That's implementation with 14, 15 different vendors. It's managing the ongoing, health of the program with 14 or 15 different vendors. And at the same time, there's not been like a ton of utilization with a few of these solutions. And some of it is because we're looking at smaller pockets of the population that these solutions are ultimately meant to address. But part of it also is that just people aren't necessarily utilizing the benefit tools that are available to them because they don't know that they're there. As you sort of think about the care partner panel, how do you think that might flip the script a little bit in terms of like legacy challenges with utilization of programs like what you have in place in your panel, your partner panel, and like what Benefitfocus can really do to kind of help improve that usage rate?
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. This was one of the litmus tests that we needed to think about internally before we got into the space, which, sure, if we can clear the administrative burden and make it easier to do vendor management, great, we'll do that. But that's not really a reason to get into, point solution aggregation or curation. You really need to move the needle on access and engagement. And if we didn't believe we could do that, we wouldn't have gotten into this space. And so we've really looked at the entire member journey, and we've asked the question, okay, where inside of that member journey does it make sense to elevate whatever the solution is, right? It's not necessarily just my business with the digital health piece, but it could be other things, like a member needing to, contribute more to their HSA or something like that. But where I think we have sort of become uniquely qualified to play in the digital health point solution space is kind of going back to our health insights business. Before a client even decides which solutions to offer, we've built these really robust dashboards that allow them to see what and model what the impact of deploying a Hello Heart or a Sword might mean to their population, so they can model out the ROI in real time on their data. That's number one. So making it easier for the administrator to know what should I do and what would the impact be. Let me take that to my CFO.
Yep.
Secondarily, for the member, to your point, like, if they don't use these solutions, then that ROI never comes to fruition. And so our Health Insights tool allows us to target the right members, so we can watch their sort of healthcare journey, and to the extent they exhibit, as an example, they're pre-diabetic and non-compliant with care, we can surface, look, like you have access to Omada, you should think about enrolling in this program. And we do it in a non-intrusive way. And, we make it as part of their sort of insights tab on the platform or the mobile application. And we try to be respectful of their communication preferences and that sort of thing. But ultimately, we want to make it, easy to know that you have these solutions, and obvious in terms of how to get there and take action. And candidly, this is the reason why you get into this space. If you can move the needle in engagement, it makes makes all the difference in the world, because as former consultant, oftentimes these solutions just kind of get tacked on to a medical plan, and they're hidden inside of lots of other things, and great things that the health plan is doing for the member, but they're hidden and people don't use them, and as a result, the impact doesn't come.
How often is somebody going to not have a need during open enrollment, but they're going to have a need if they're plan year starts in January, they might have a need on March 1st. So they're going to remember what they read on page 15 of an open enrollment guide back in the prior November, right? So the fact that you guys have figured out a way to sort of marry the claims data, the on-demand experience, the 365-day a year experience with what you guys are able to offer from an administration perspective, and then be able to get that information to the members like when they actually have that care need, or as soon as possible after your data informs you that they have a care need. That's just like very much changing the game on I think, what has sort of been the norm for decades around kind of launching new programs within the benefits program too. So, you obviously in your role as sort of the VP of ecosystem, right? Whether that's your formal title or you made that one up, either way, like it requires you to kind of stay on top of trends. How are you ultimately doing that? Are you relying on kind of relationships, or how do you ultimately stay up to speed on kind of what's new and out there that you guys might think about adding to the care partner panel, a year or two from now?
Lots of different inputs. Consultants have opinions, and they're really not shy about
I
sharing
don't know
those.
what you're
So
talking about, man.
yeah, no. So I spend a lot of time with our consultant partners, asking questions about where the puck's going for them, because ultimately we're building tools to support their strategy. I take meetings with almost anyone, and I may regret saying that on this podcast, depending on your reach, but I mean, but you really do, because the minute you think you know everything, or that or that you've got this industry figured out, that's pretty much the minute you probably should think about getting out of it, because it's always changing. And I think having an ear to the ground and a willingness to talk to folks about ideas that may not seem um, you know particularly relevant in the moment is really important. The other thing is, obviously try to keep a network in the private equity space and the venture capital space, because oftentimes those are the arenas where a lot of these great ideas get the oxygen that they need to become, something in real life. And so, as you can see from our initial set of partners, we didn't take big bets in terms of, going with super, sort of, nascent companies. They're all well established, industry leading. It's something that I think a lot about, which is that, oftentimes innovation happens Series A and seed, and it's something that, our customer base, I think, would not appreciate necessarily, us, bringing forward, solutions that are, sort of less mature. But I definitely want to, be a resource for those types of organizations, and, help guide them around what, a company like ours expects in a partner. And so I think there's, it's a lot of those things,
Yeah.
Kirk.
What do you think employers are going to need to contend with over the next 5 years as they sort of have their sort of telescope out to 2030? Like what's going to be sort of crystal ball? Like what's top of mind for employers 5 years from now, if you had to predict that?
Well, yeah, shoot, Kirk. I should have prepped for that one. So here's the thing. I think the most obvious statement in the world is that costs are not sustainable, and that is a societal problem at this point. That's not an employer problem. Like we as a society have to figure that out. And I don't think we're going to solve that on this particular podcast, but the emerging options that may exist to support employers in dealing with, the unsustainability of these rising costs. There are many of them, and some of them are about delivering better care outcomes and more efficient care pathways. Others are more extreme, right? Like we've seen, a pretty massive shift towards ICHRA solutions,
Yeah.
not necessarily, in the 1,000+ space where we play a ton, but below that, and candidly, not as small of employers as one might have expected, right? Like are adopting, ICHRA as an option for for mitigating, some of that expense. And I don't know if that's the right, answer, right? But what I do know is, uh, individuals, caring more about their own personal health outcomes is mission critical for the solving the societal challenge of healthcare costs being entirely out of control. Beyond that, I'm not sure, Kirk. I don't have the crystal ball today.
That's, I think, where organizations like you guys, organizations like us can really help based on the types of things you're doing with your partnerships and the way that you have access to your customers, members throughout the year to help them avoid the catastrophic types of cost increases that are going to end up putting some businesses potentially out of business and having to really think about that hard step into ICRA, into reference based, eliminating benefit programs altogether. So you're right. Like from my perspective, if we can figure out a way to manage cost and quality and do so in a pretty non-disruptive way, like the ideal state is not for a client to want to go down that path. Like that's sort of like last ditch effort at the end of the day too. So
I agree with you. I do think, when you look at, some of the things, consumer grade technologies, particularly things like, like ChatGPT and Claude and other, LLMs that have, sort of changed the way we live our lives outside of work. Looking at the power of technologies like that and how they might be applicable inside of, the sort of infrastructure of employer based and or just broader healthcare delivery. I think that's obviously going to revolutionize the way care is delivered. We even see, gosh, like I heard a stat recently that one of the largest uses of ChatGPT in the last year was actually folks seeking like therapy or therapeutic interventions that are similar to things like receiving cognitive behavioral therapy. There's not a commercial interest there. That's just an individual seeking help, right? And to me, I can't imagine a decade out from now where a world where that the level of sort of innovation that's occurred in the way we live our day-to-day lives and rely heavily on artificial intelligence. I can't imagine that not impacting the sort of employer-based healthcare world.
yeah, I mean, I think that's an awesome example just to know that they're actually like people are they're looking for ways to get better, to find better care, et cetera. And they're taking advantage of these new technologies, like you said, like on their own, not ultimately, something that an employer is out there communicating to them or a Ben admin vendor is out there communicating to. Like that to me kind of gives us hope though. Like people are finding really cool ways to leverage this technology. I'm also curious, like this is going to be like a little bit off the cuff here, Chad, but one of the things that we're out talking to clients about is I was at a conference yesterday and I was talking about this. Like we're actually seeing that social media is playing in a lot to how people are actually having their healthcare decisions influenced right now. Like TikTok influencers are the ones that are telling people where to deliver their babies. And like, I think some innovative employers are actually figuring out ways to use things like TikTok as they help support employee communications throughout the year. Like anything under the hood that you're able to share on what you've seen around like dynamic marketing and engagement strategies like that might be using social media too.
So what's interesting is that, many of the sort of, vendors and ultimately partners that, we've looked at, I think they've done a good job of tapping into the need for social connection around whatever, sort of, thing they're doing, whether it's, a behavioral health thing that's probably the most obvious, area where you would see, like social circles be a really important thing. But, we've primarily seen them using, their own sort of infrastructure for that versus pointing people to, Facebook or Instagram or what have you. Our willingness to take advice from non-experts is really in a way staggering to me, but also, something that I totally agree with you. I think it's a human instinct, right? Is to look to your neighbor for help and for advice. And, curating those spaces and ensuring that those spaces have good information. I think that is a unique opportunity for folks that are in and around our world to think about.
I'll land on kind of one last question. What does success look like for you guys?
It's really clear. We intend to be the partner to employers that can do two things. One is to make all of your other partners more efficient and effective. And in so doing, deliver that substantial ROI across many different areas of need. And that can be everything from making your lives easier through automating, processes that used to be manual, through to delivering, better outcomes with your digital health strategy, and as a result, delivering reductions in your healthcare spend. It's as simple as that. That's success.
Well, this was an awesome conversation, Chad. Really big thanks to you for joining today. We've explored kind of how benefits administration technology is evolving from a back office necessity to a frontline enabler, curating a best-in-class ecosystem that supports members not just at enrollment, but really every day throughout the year. So my takeaway here is that great benefits aren't just about what you offer. It's about how your people are accessing, how they're understanding them, how they're using them. And I think a well-designed tech stack like what Benefitfocus is doing here can really help to bridge that gap and really bring some clarity and confidence to interactions that employees are having with their benefits. So Chad, thanks again for joining. Thanks again to everybody who tuned in. Appreciate your time and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thanks, Kirk.
If you're liking the conversation, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you've been enjoying Margin of Care, please leave us a review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. If you've got feedback or questions or something you'd like us to cover on the show, send us a note anytime at marginofcare@getgarner.com. We'd love to hear from you.